Wait, did I not get that right?
I hope so.
Who's? Oh, okay,
Somebody else.
somebody else. Sorry.
At least I have maybe something I don't know.
Oh,
Okay, 1 second. Here we are. Okay, we're in the bottom of Tzadik Beis and Beis.
92B.
92b. 6 lines in the bottom of the page, in the middle of the line. Okay, so if you just reminding, going back from yesterday, we were discussing a bunch of different phrases. A couple of them are modern day idioms. Was it "Don't bite the hand that feeds you"? Something like that. It was one of them. And now we continue. Amar le Rava Rabbi Bar Mori. Rava says to Rabbi Bar Mori, "Minoha milsa the Amri and she." Where is this concept that people say, "Idalis dura dalina ve'iloi loy dalina"? If you come with me, if you lift the burden with me, then I'll carry it too. If you want me to carry it myself, then I'm not going to carry it. In other words, if you want me to take a risk, then come join me on the risk. So Barak. So this is when Devorah, the prophetess, told Barak, the general, to go fight a battle. And Barak was, he was not as brave as he should have been. And it's not my critique, the Talmud critiques him. Ultimately speaking, as we saw the Haftarah of not this past week, but 2 weeks ago, Barak was the consequence of Barak's lack of bravery was that the general's sister was not handed over to Barak. It was handed over to Yoel, a woman, who ended up killing the general. So, and the reason is because of this lack of bravery. What happened? Barak. So Barak says to her, if you Devorah, a woman, prophetess, will come with me to battle, then I'll go and do battle. If not, I'm not going. Which is sort of this idea where a person is scared, he wants company. When we were young, people considered us as men. Now that we got old, they consider us as kids. So Amrlei, he says as follows: initially it says, when the Jewish people left Egypt, right, there was sort of a youth over there, a moment of what the prophet calls the kindness of your youth, chesed ne'urayich. So what does it say? It says that God led them, God himself leads them with a cloud of glory and a cloud of fire at nighttime. Well, besides, later on they were punished. And what happened? God sent an angel, God at least was going to send an angel to go ahead of them instead of God's presence himself going ahead of them. So they were treated as less mature. When they were younger, they were treated with more respect. When they were older, they were treated like kids. It's worth pointing out here that Moshe Rabbeinu requested from HaKadosh Baruch Hu not to have a shliach, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence should remain with them, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu listened to him. So ultimately speaking, the messenger was not sent. God's presence was always with them throughout their sojourn in the desert. If you associate with a man of means, you'll be able to take away chunks of fat. Fat you'll be able to take for yourself. Meaning that if you associate it with people of high status, you sort of gain a lot of fringe benefits. Where is this sort of a source of this idea? Light, the nephew of Avram, because of his association with Avram, he got a benefit. He got sheep and cattle and tents. Rav Chanan says, okay, so now we finished the phrases, these idioms that Rava and Rabba were talking about. Gemara continues with another side piece of Agadta. Somebody who has a judgment against his friend and decides to hand over the judgment to God, to request God to prosecute his judgment, he's penalized first. We'll get to the specifics in a moment before the questions. as the verse says, that Sarai says to Avram, "Chamasi alecha, I'm jealous of you." Avram lisped l'Sarai v'livkaisa. Sarai was jealous of Avram, and she wanted children for herself, and she ended up dying before Avram. Okay, and she died at a significantly younger age, 127. Avram lived to 180 years old. Okay, so the Gemara says, "V'haini mili de isle dina ba'ara." This is only when they have a recourse in this world, meaning there's something they can do about it. But if they don't have a recourse, then it is permitted to ask God to intercede on their behalf. Second. Yeah. Okay, and the arguments of Sarah was specifically that Avram was davening for himself to have children, not for her. That's why Avram conceived with Hagar, and also she complained against Hagar. She complained she was treated disrespectfully by Hagar in the presence of Avram, and she prayed to God to intercede on her behalf. Although she could have asked Avram directly she could have addressed her complaints to Avram directly. And therefore she died first. Okay, but if somebody does not have any other recourse in this world, then he's allowed to go ask God to issue judgments. Amar Rav Yitzchak. Rav Yitzchak says, very interesting, the one who cries out is worse off than the one about whom he's crying out about. Tanya Amihachi, the Bryce also supports this. Echad hatzayek ve'echad hanitzach mashma. Somebody else is causing somebody else pain, right? So the one who calls out to God for his suffering, both the one who calls out and the one who's called out because of are all included in this category. El shemaran l'tzayek yosem and hanitzach. 1 second. The one who calls out is punished before the one who causes the pain, who causes the other guy to call out. Rav Yitzchak says, the curse of a simple man should not be should not be light in your eyes. Avimelech killed Sarah, v'niskayim b'Sarah. Avimelech cursed Sarah, and the curse was fulfilled with her children. Shenemar, hinuhu l'chak susenayim. Okay, the simple version of the verse here is that basically, if Avimelech would have given back Sarah to Avraham without any presents, without any gifts, it would have been presumed that Avimelech had accomplished his personal desires with Sarah, and like any king, and then sort of gave her back to her husband when he was finished. Like all the kings at the time. Although Avimelech was the unique one to at least claim to be righteous. Most of them didn't have that pretense of negotiating with God. However, now that Avimelech gave her back with gifts, it was presumed that there was some sort of miracle that occurred and Avimelech had to atone for his sin. The king did whatever he wanted those days. There's no such thing, he didn't give gifts to cover up his own, personal desires. There's no need for that. He was the king. He can do whatever he wanted. The fact that he gave her back with gifts indicated to the populace that there was something he had to atone for, and at least left a certain amount, removed a certain amount of suspicion that Sarah was violated. That's a simple version of the verse. So Ksusinayim sort of means to cover the eyes of jealousy, the eyes of the gossip and rumor mill. But the other...
So giving
gifts would cover the rumor mill. It's not like today. Today's the opposite, right? Everyone does settlements. It doesn't work that way. It's the opposite. It's a king. He can do whatever he wants. He doesn't have any settlements, doesn't have any DOJ, and there's none of that. He's not accountable to anybody. As a matter of fact, Power didn't really apologize, and And not only that, Pari said, don't live here because somebody else will rape your wife.
No.
You know, which is sort of just a recognition of what where his population was in terms of their self-control. There's a reason why the Torah calls Mitzrayim Ervas Haaretz, the promiscuous of the land, the most promiscuous nation. Abimelech at least had this pretense of trying to pretend that he was righteous, which is why that he wanted to make sure there would not even have been a suspicion that Sarah was violated. Okay, so that's a simple version. However, the other interpretation is Hinehu l'chaksus einayim was a curse. He was cursing her that her eyes should be covered. Okay, let's explain. Because you covered the fact that she was your wife, Sarah was the wife of Avram, you didn't reveal it, that she is your wife. The garments alai had Sarah, you caused this tremendous pain, right? We saw the Gemara yesterday. There was a lot of constipation in the house of Avimelech. Yehirotzen sheyilcha b'nei kisui einayim. Yehirotzen should be God's will. It's a curse. The curse, you should be cursed that your children, that you should have children that whose eyes are covered. And it's Gayim Bazara, it'll say Yihiki Zok and Yitzchak with the Chena Ein of Erois. When Yitzchak got older, he was blind. Amro Bevu, Lo'olam Yeh Adam min Hanir Dofim v'lo min Hareitfin. A person should be from the chaste and not from the chasers. There is no chaste bird as chaste as term, I believe, are doves. Pigeons and doves. Yeah, pigeon. A pigeon. Torah is a pigeon. And doves. And these most chaste birds are the ones that God desires for sacrifice.
You see what behaving well got those birds in the end?
Somebody says, blind my eye. Okay. We'll go back to the mission, just review this briefly. The mission made a differentiation between if somebody says to damage his own organs, or if somebody says damage my clothes. So this is really the end of the parak. If he says damage my organs and I'll exempt you, you're not exempt. If he says damage my clothes and I'll exempt you, then you are exempt. Yeah, what's the distinction? What's the difference? The first part, you cannot forgive your own personal damage, your physical body. Can a person forgive his pain? The Tanya we learned, if a guy says you can hit me and you can wound me and you'll be exempt, then he's actually exempt. So what's the difference? Ishtaki was silent. He didn't know the answer. Have you heard an answer? This is what I heard in the name of Rav Sheshes. The reason why you can't exempt somebody from blinding you is because blinding is not just for yourself, but it brings shame on the family. You know, I just had a relative who had a child that was born with a significant imperfection, let's say, and there's no fault of anybody, but the fact is, a child will have a certain imperfection he'll have to live with, and there's like a lot of hushed tones. Who's going to know? Who's not going to know? When do we tell everybody? There's a certain amount of shame associated with it. So therefore, you cannot forgive personal damage. It can't be forgiven because it's not just up to you. It's up to it's a familial brings familial shame and therefore can't be forgiven. Okay, that's one answer. Rava says because you can't forgive for Rosh Hashanah. 1 second. Yeah. Rava's response is that there's a difference between pain and between damage. You can forgive pain, you can't forgive damage. We together? And that's the distinction. In other words, damage cannot be forgiven. That's the Mishnah. Pain could be forgiven. That's the Brisa. And additionally, you can forgive damage to your own clothing. That's the second half of the Mishnah. Okay. Rabbi Yehudah has a different version of the Brisa here. And he says the sort of the conversation went a little bit differently. Yesh hein shu kalav. There's a yes that's a no. The yesh lav shu kahain. There's a no that's a yes. And it's basically if it's rhetorical or not. Tanya nami hachi. The Brisa says this as well. Let's say the guy says hikani pitzani. Reuven says, go hit me. So Shimon says, like, I'm an ass lifter. Like, do you mean to exempt me? V'amrloi hein. He says to him, he says, do you think, like, yeah? Like, as if it's a question. Like, do you think I will exempt you? In that case, that yes is really a no. In other words, the rhetorical yes is actually no, you're not going to be exempt. Do you think I would exempt you? The reverse scenario, kara eskusi. A guy says to his friend, rip my clothes. The guy says to him, I'm an ass lifter. He says to him, are you going? So Reuven says, rip my clothes. So Shimon says, are you going to exempt me? So again, Reuven answers with the rhetorical, no, of course not. In other words, obviously, yes, right? Because like, otherwise, why would I tell you to rip my clothes? That's an example of a no that is like a yes. Okay, very simple. According to Rabbi Yehudah, Rabbi Yechanan, it's dependent on the conversation. There were different conversations going on here in the first and second half of the Mishnah. Was it a rhetorical yes or was it a rhetorical no? And that's according to Rabbi Yechanan, you could be exempt on damage of, if a guy says blind my eye and you said you gave a serious yes, or Reuven says to Shimon, blind my eye. And Reuven says, and I'll make you exempt financially. According to Rabbi Yechanan, he would actually be financially exempt. Unlike the first two opinions where he would not be financially exempt, either because of the shame to his family or because a person cannot forgive damage to his organs. Shavar.
It's almost like saying your body is not yours. Money you can do what I tell you to do. Your body is not yours for me to tell you what you can do to my body.
According to Rav, absolutely. It's exactly correct. And that's the Gemara's beginning impression in as well. And Rav Sheshes sort of modifies that slightly, and he says that it would depend on the shame of the family. The guy says, break my barrel, rip my clothing. Chayev. You're liable if you break it, unless he specifically states, break it and I will exempt you. V'raminu. If a guy said, one second, okay. Lishmor. A guy, okay, so there's Reuven and Shimon again, right? So Reuven says to Shimon, be my watchman. Okay, let's say Shimon it was a free watchman or a paid watchman, maybe it was a renter, whatever it was. Shimon is negligent, the item is stolen. What happens? Shimon has to pay if he was negligent. If he wasn't negligent, he would have to make an oath, and then he'd be exempt. Okay, now, one second. Okay, what happens if the guy says to him, "I'd like you to give this out to the poor people. So I'm giving you a barrel full of wheat. I'd like you to distribute it to the poor, or I'd like you to dispose of it." And the guy went ahead and, instead of disposing it, he broke the barrel. Instead of giving it to the poor, he ate it for himself. So lishmer, he has to be given the barrel to watch it. However, if he's given the barrel of loyla abid, if he's given the barrel to dispose of it, and he decides instead of disposing it to eat it himself, or to get rid of it some other way or break it, there's no obligation there. That's not called a shomer. A shomer means you're going to watch it and give it back to me whole. If I tell you, lishmer of loyla kroya, if I told you to rip it and you went ahead and broke it some other way, you're not considered a watchman. You're exempt. Lishmer of chalak lanim. If I told you go give out these clothes to the poor and you went ahead and burnt them, you're exempt. The question is why? He never said to him, if you break it, I'm going to exempt you. He told him, give it to the poor. But that's sufficient. That means that if you told me to give it to the poor, that means you didn't want me to watch it. You wanted me to distribute it. And in that case, I'm exempt from damaging it. Now, by the way, why can't the poor collect it? Because the poor is a very loose group of people. The poor can never collect anything from anybody in most scenarios. Let's say somebody promises this will be given to the poor, and he doesn't give it. So the court could force him because he didn't keep his vow. but the poor cannot bring him to a court case and demand that they represent the poor, because maybe they don't represent the poor that he would have been giving it to. He'd be giving it to a different poor people. Okay, so Amar Rav Huna loy kash hada asli yadi hada loy asli yadi. Okay, so Rav Huna proposes that if he actually breaks it with his hands, meaning the guy says, "Rip my clothing," and the guy rips the clothing up, in that case, he'd be liable. But if he says, "You go distribute this clothing to the poor," and the guy keeps the door of the truck open at night, and some robbers come and take the whole thing, he didn't actually ruin it with his hands. That's why he's exempt. The difference is whether he physically destroyed it. Now, let's say the guy told him, "Go give this truck to the poor," and the guy went ahead and torched the truck. He lit the whole thing on fire. In that case, he would be liable. That's the distinction that Rav Huna attempts to make. Rabba says no, that's not true. Lishmar the asli yadi malishmar. The Bryce that we pointed out, where the guy torches the truck, it's not necessarily where the robber stole the truck. It could be even in a scenario where the guy torched it. The guy lit the truck on fire. It doesn't make a difference. He's still exempt. Rabba says, of course he did the damage on his own. Either he ripped up the clothes because they were going to Goodwill, or he ripped up the clothes because his friend told him to rip up the clothes. Depends on why he got the item. If you told him to be a watchman, and here's a watchman, take the truck to Goodwill and give it to the poor or Salvation Army or whatever it is. So in that case, the law of Shomer doesn't apply. He's not considered a watchman, and therefore if he damages it, he's exempt. But if a guy says to his friend, "Go take my shirt and rip it," and his friend takes it to rip, then you're liable. In other words, there's a limitation in the laws of Shomrim. You cannot be a watchman unless you're given the job to give it back at the end. If you're given the job with some sort of loose possibility of how you can get rid of the item, how the item will leave your domain, there's no liability whatsoever. It doesn't make a difference what ended up happening, whether you gave it to the poor, whether you put it down the sewer, or whether you consumed it in your own house. You don't have the law of a shomer here. And the guy effectively has forfeited the item by telling you to dispose of it. Whereas if the guy says, "Rip my clothing," and you went ahead and actually listened to him without getting a specific mention that you will be exempt, you're not a shomer, you're not a watchman, so you don't have the exemption of shomer. It's not forfeited, it's owned by the original owner. And if you damage it, you're liable. Okay, now we get to an exception to this rule. There was a money bag that was a charity box that came to Pumpadisa. After the Rav Yosef Gabi Gavra, so Rav Yosef gave it to let's say Reuven to watch it. Pashaba, Reuven was negligent. He didn't lock the doors to his house. Also Ganvi and the robbers came along and Ganvu and they stole it. Chavu Rav Yosef, so Rav Yosef said he has to pay. Reuven, the watchman over the charity purse, has to pay. What's the question here? Seems to contradict the previous Gemara. Previous Gemara we said that a charity purse cannot be given, a charity purse that's to be distributed to the poor can't be given over to a watchman. And if it does, and the watchman is negligent, the watchman will be exempt. This seems to contradict the previous brisa. So you're not a watchman if your final completion of your work is to give it to the poor. So Amar Lei, so Yosef says, no, this is different. I need the Pumpadisa make as kitzlahu v'lishmer. Regularly, if you tell him here's a barrel of wheat, go distribute it to the poor. He can give it to whichever poor people he wants in whichever amounts he wants. Right? It could be of this city, it could be a different city, it could be anything, any type of poor people. Over here, however, this money thing, the money purse of Pumpadisa was not like that. The money purse of Pumpadisa, there was a list of people that were beneficiaries, and everyone got a fixed amount every single week. So we know exactly where the money is supposed to go to. In this case, the poor do have a right to the money. Because it's not some loose, give it to the poor. No. It's give it to this list of poor people and this amount, which is the amount that's always given. In that case, those poor people have a right to aggregate together and make a class action case against the watchman, and it does qualify for the laws of watching. This is called a watchman because the end of his mission as a watchman wasn't some abstract, loose definition. It was very clear and concise, and therefore they're all owners, and he's considered a watchman. And they have to pay. One. Okay, next paragraph. Okay, Hagoizel Eitzim Vasan Kalim. Somebody steals, he steals wood. Vasan Kalim, he turns them into vessels. How exactly do you turn wood into vessels? So let's just give let's say there are 3 ways to do it. Let's say there are 3 ways to do it.
Stick it on the leg.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. So let's talk about the key concept here, which what we spoke about in the past. It's called shinoi. Shinoi kaina. Shinoi means to make a physical change to the item. So jewels has the most aggressive form of change. What is that? You put it on a lathe. In other words, you literally destroy most of the wood to be left with a bowl or whatever you're doing on your lathe or mill or whatever it is. Substantial destruction. Another example, let's say, is an assembly. So you've taken a piece of wood that's already pre-cut, it's cut to size, and you need to put it into your vessel, into your box. Let's say you're making a big box, and your box is going to be 4x8, right? And you have this frame, and all you need to do is take a bunch of 4x8 boards and slide them into the frame. They don't even have to be drilled in, or maybe if they do, the drilling is minimal. In that case, the wood is identical, right?
Mhm.
And the third scenario, which is sort of in between, is what the Gemara calls loshov. Loshov is to plane. Planing as in making a very smooth surface. Typically, a human contact surface is going to be planed wood, right? So you run it through either multiple knives or the old-fashioned way, the planer, or the new ones, the spiral planers. You make it very smooth. Those are 3 ways to take raw wood and turn it into a vessel. And the Gemara will start dealing with these specifics. Which one exactly happened? Similarly, semer v'asan begadim. You took wool and you turned it into a garment. How do you do that? It could be a number of ways, right? It could be like a knitted sweater, right? Which is sort of the string isn't really messed with. You still have really, from what I understand, I'm not some great knitter, but from what I understand, you can actually undo the knitting and you'll have a ball of yarn at the end.
Right.
So actually the yarn isn't changed. There's no change. It's just put together in a complex way, but there's no real change there. Or you could actually weave it together, sew it. You could turn it into a garment. You can use it as thread to sew something. And there's a lot of cutting and changing that goes on with that. You could also turn it into felts. So from what I understand, again, this is not my area of expertise. I've never made felt before. From what I understand, felt is defined by taking a bunch of fibers and banging them together. They sort of, I don't know if that makes sense, but apparently that's how it works.
It's a heartfelt gesture.
And in that case, it could be a permanent connection. You can no longer spin those fibers and turn them into threads. We'll discuss this all in the Gemara, different ways to do this. Okay. The point is, you do any of this, mishalam kashasak zela. You pay the value that it was at the time that it was stolen. We'll have to get into the specifics. The point is, if it constitutes a shinoi, a change, you acquire the item, then you have to pay the value. You pay for your stealing in monetary terms. Generally speaking, you steal something, you give back what you stole. But over here, if you made a change, you pay it back with money. Gozal param uberes, you stole a pregnant animal, the yolda, and it gave birth. Rachel tu'una, you stole a sheep that was filled with wool. I don't know what's a better English word for that. A sheep that's and what happened then? It was a sheep that was ready to be sheared, and then he sheared the gozes, he sheared it. So mishalim to make par ha'medes leiled. You pay the value of the ox that's about to give birth, and the value of a sheep about to be sheared. Gozel parv and its abra. You stole a cow and it became pregnant. That's v'nisabra etz levi yolda, and it gave birth, in the robber's domain. Rachel v'nitna etz levi gaza. He stole a sheep and it became loaded with wool, and he sheared it while it was in his domain. Mishalim g'shasik zela. He pays the animal as it was worth at the time that he stole it. Zaklal. This is the general rule. Kol gaslana mishalim g'shasik zela. You pay the value of the item at the time it was stolen. Okay.
Okay, well, I'm gonna jump the gun here, Rabbi, but what's gonna come up is, the thief steals something, he transforms it into an object of greater value, where the value.
We'll get to it.
Added value cannot be extricated.
We'll get to it.
So.
We'll get to it. Probably, I don't know, it's tomorrow or the day afterwards. We will get to it. Maybe even today. I think it's tomorrow. Okay. Amri, Eitzim Asan Kalim in Shifon Loy. If you turn so the Gemara presumes here that you turn the wood into a vessel. How do you do that? You put it on a mill or a lathe. Shifon, but if you planed it Loy, that does not constitute a significant change, right? So you buy the 4x8, you cut it to size, that's a real change. You buy a 4x8 and you plane it, it's mostly the same. It's slightly improved. Semer vasan begadim. You took wool and you turned it into clothing. In live none, but if you whitened it, you clean the wool, that does not constitute a change. That's a relatively minor event. V'raminu gozel eitzim v'shifon avonim b'sisason. You took wood, you planed it. Avonim b'sisason, you smoothed over the rocks. This is the equivalent of planing by rocks. So you can make the rock usable, sanded it down, whatever it is, filed it down. Semer, you took wool, v'livnon, and you whitened it. Pishton, flax, v'nikeu, you cleaned it. In all these cases, mishalom g'shas akzela. You pay the value as it was at the time it was stolen. This brisa seems to imply that even lesser changes still constitute a significant change, such that the robber acquires a stolen item and pays money. Seems to be a contradiction. The This is the wrong understanding. So we started off explaining the Mishnah that what does it mean to make a vessel? To put it on a lathe or a mill. In other words, to actually, substantially transform it. And the answer is no. Our mission is actually not even talking about that. Our mission is talking about even lesser levels. Like I said, the guy has a frame for a box. He's going to make a 4x8 box, and he dumps in a bunch of 4x8 panels. In that case, there is no change whatsoever. You can just slide out the panels and give it back to Home Depot. You can even return it. They probably wouldn't notice the difference. So this is called a Shina D'Rabbanan, a rabbinical change. Why? Because it's the Hadra. It can go back to the original state. And certainly, if you did a physical change, like sanding it or planing it or cleaning it, etc. Okay, so Eitzam Asan Kit.
But then it couldn't go back.
So there, for sure you acquire it. And as our mission is talking about, even where it could go back to its original state, you still acquire it. You still pay money. Certainly, where you did a physical change, for sure that you'd acquire it and pay money instead of returning the item.
But you pay money before it was changed.
You pay the value of what it was as it was stolen. Yeah. Okay. Eitzam Asan Kalim. You took wood and you turned it into vessels. What are we talking about? Eitzam Mishupin. The wood was already planed. Umani u'nesarim. These are like planed woods. The Shina D'Hadra L'Briyasehu. The change that you sort of installed it was a change that can go back to its original state as planed woods. The Ibai Mishlafahu, you can just slide it out and return it. Semer Vasam Begadim, you took wool and you turned it into clothes. How is that possible? But Semer Tovi, you stole a yarn. The Shini D'Hadra L'Briyasa, technically speaking, you could unwind your whole yarn thing. The things that are made of yarn, there's no real change. So you can unwind it, you'll get back a ball of yarn. The Ibai Sasralai, if he wants, he can undo it. The Kolshkin Shini D'Raisa, and certainly physical changes that you would certainly acquire the item with those changes. Tanan brother Brisa Shini D'Raisa Ktani Shini D'Rabbanan like Tani. It talks about changes that cannot be undone, like sanding or like whitening. You whiten the raw wool, and therefore those are permanent, and you acquire it with those changes. Shini D'Rabbanan like Tani, the Brisa does not talk about changes that are sort of that are not permanent, that can go back to the original state. Ravashi says, our Mishnah is also referring to Shini D'Raisa. Eitzam Asan Kalim. When we talk about wood that was turned into vessels, we're talking about buchni. Tahainu shipon, meaning what's a buchni? A buchni is I believe is the pestle, right? That's the thing that you use to whack the herbs, the stuff.
Yeah, pestle, that's what they call it.
The pestle. Now, the pestle, what is a pestle?
It's a stick.
It's a stick, basically, right? But it's not just a stick. It's a stick that's planed. So it's smooth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Effectively, anything could be a pestle, as long as the wood isn't, rough and porous. So what is the change that happened? The change was a change of planing. Is exactly the same thing as the brisa. Got it? Dahainu shipon. Semer vasan begadim. You took wool and you turned it into clothes. What does that mean? Nimti. It means felts. Dahainu shinin delay hajar. What you did was you took the wool, the raw wool, and you batted it down into felts. This is the same as whitening it, which is usually done prior to spinning it. It's effectively the same type of change. So the Mishnah and the Bryce are really saying the same thing. So Gemara says, okay, if libun mi have a shinoi, is libun is whitening a shinoi. V'raminu, we have a question. Like hitzbik litn loy achet savai potter. You did not have a okay. So this is the law of ratius, I guess. The law of ratius, I guess, basically is if you have sheep, you have to have a minimum size of a herd of 5, whose first shearing is the weight of a mana and a pras. I don't know how much that is. Let's say it's 8 pounds. 8 pounds worth of wool from 5 animals. That obligates you to give a gift of wool to the kohen. How much is the gift? It's any amount, but it has to be substantial. It has to be considered this is considered a gift. Rabbinically, they said the gift should be 1/60th of the total volume, 1.8%. Okay, so now what happened? He didn't have a chance to give it to the kohen until he dyed the wool. Potter, he's exempt. Let's say he whitened the wool but did not dye it, then chayev is still liable. He's still obligated to give the gift to the kohen. What does this tell us? That dyeing is a change, and you would be exempt from giving it to the kohen. Whitening is not a change. That's why you're still obligated to give it to the kohen. Rabbi says, "Loikash, it's not difficult." Rab Shimon, Harabanon. One opinion is Rab Shimon, one is the rabbis. Tanya, we learned. Gazazu, you sheared the animal. Tavu, you spun the wool. Va'argu, you wove it. Aim it starif. Okay. So what happened was the guy sheared the first sheep. He spun the wool, wove it into a garment. Then he sheared the second sheep, did the same thing, spun it, wove it. Then he did the third sheep, spun it, wove it. Fourth sheep, spun it, wove it. Fifth sheep. And now the combined weight of all the spun and woven wool is more than the 8 pounds necessary to be halachically obligated. It doesn't combine. You're still not obligated. Why? Because you changed it. You turned it into wool. You have to give it as wool. You changed it into material, into garment. You have to give it as wool. Livnu, what happens if you whitened it? Reb Shimon says, aim it star if they don't connect. Reb Shimon says, even if you just whitened it, you sheared it, whitened it, sheared it, whitened it, sheared it, whitened it, does not connect. Why? Reb Shimon obviously holds whitening is a change. The rabbis say, on the other hand, whitening is not a change, and all the volume of all 5 animals still combines. Together? Okay. Rava says, no. Hava Reb Shimon, it could be both can be according to Reb Shimon. But loikash, had the naftzin, if we say had the sarke sruki. Depends what type of whitening. There's whitening that's done with a comb, there's whitening that's done with the fingers. The one that's done with the fingers is not considered a significant change. The one that's done with a comb is considered a significant change. I guess part of the process was they used to comb it. Okay. Rav Chia bar Ravin says, had the kavri, had the kavri kivruye. Okay. Did you whiten it by washing it in water, or did you whiten it by using sulfur? Apparently, it's some sort of soap, and it whitens. And I'm not quite familiar. But that would be much more of a substantial change. Okay. The Gemara has a question though. So the Gemara is saying, according to Rav Shimon, whitening is a change. There's just one problem. Whitening is much less of a change than what? Dyeing. Dyeing is a way more substantial change than whitening. And what does Rav Shimon say about dyeing? Let's find out. If dyeing, according to Rav Shimon, is not a change, we'll see that in a moment, then for sure whitening should not be a change. Whitening is a much lower level change than dyeing, which is a much more major change. The Tanya learned in the Brisa. Gozaz Rishon, same story. He had the 5 animals lined up. He cuts the first one, Vitzavai, and he dyes it. Vitzavai, Rishon, Vitzavai, Rishon. Or instead of dyeing it, he wove it. He spun it. Or Rishon V'argo, he wove it. Ein Mitzdarif, they don't connect. Reb Shimon Yehudah, I remember Reb Shimon, it's Tzavim Mitzdarif. That dyeing it does allow you to connect the wool of all 5 animals. Okay, what does that indicate to us? That Reb Shimon holds that dyeing does not constitute a change. If dyeing does not constitute a change, certainly whitening shouldn't be considered a change. And if a robber whitens wool that he stole, he should give the wool back as is, and not pay a financial payment.
Yeah.
So the Gemara says very simple resolution. Rabbi Eloi Kasha, Harabon Alib Reb Shimon, Harab Shimon Yehudah Alib Reb Shimon. There's a debate about what Reb Shimon's opinion is. One opinion of Reb Shimon says that whitening is considered a change, and for sure dyeing is considered a change. And the other brisa says that dyeing isn't even a change. Certainly whitening is not a change. The debate of what Reb Shimon says. Rav Amar, Rav says, there's no debate about what Reb Shimon's opinion is. Reb Shimon, Reb Shimon Yehudah. There's no debate about what Reb Shimon's opinion was. We're talking about a type of dye that could be removed with some type of sand. It's not a hold fast dye. So this dye is considered a shinoi, but it can go back to its original state. It's considered a change, but it could be changed back with minimal work. It's not a permanent change. The Bryce that says that dyeing is considered a change, and therefore the dyeing of each animal's wool does not allow the wools from different animals to combine to a measurement. We're talking about indigo, and indigo is a dye that holds strong and fast, such that it can't be easily removed by putting it in the washing machine. Okay, stop here. Tomorrow, Rabbi Brown will lead, and right now the plan is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but it could be that I'll be here on Wednesday. Depends on how things go.